The first transmission came on a Tuesday morning, crackling through every radio frequency on Earth simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chen was sipping her coffee in the SETI laboratory when the computers started screaming alerts. The message was simple, translated by what appeared to be an incredibly advanced universal translator embedded in the signal itself. Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet. You have been observed. You have been measured. You have been found wanting. The Galactic Concord hereby declares your species unfit for membership in civilized society. You are quarantined to your solar system indefinitely. Any attempt to leave will be met with immediate termination. This is not negotiable. The world stopped. Every government, every military, every scientist stared at their screens in disbelief. Humanity had dreamed of first contact for centuries, but never like this. Not with rejection before they'd even had a chance to prove themselves. Commander Jake Morrison was in his office at Space Command when the orders came down. All deep space missions are hereby cancelled, his superior told him grimly. We've got reports of some kind of energy barrier forming at the edge of our solar system. Nothing gets through. Jake pulled up the sensor data from their furthest satellites. There it was, a shimmering wall of energy that stretched in all directions, perfectly spherical, encompassing everything out to just past Pluto's orbit. Several unmanned probes had already tested it. They simply vanished the moment they touched the barrier. Sir, what's our response? Jake asked. We don't have one, Commander. How do you fight something that can cage an entire solar system? Across the globe, similar conversations were happening. In Beijing, Moscow, Washington, London, every capital was in crisis mode. The stock markets crashed. Riots broke out in major cities. Some people claimed it was a hoax, others fell to their knees in despair. Dr. Chen found herself appointed to an emergency international committee tasked with understanding the aliens and their technology. The message had been accompanied by a detailed scan of Earth's surface, showing impossible accuracy about human civilization. They knew about every military base, every nuclear weapon, every technological advancement humanity had achieved. They'd been watching us, she reported to the committee. For how long, we don't know. But they know everything about us. The alien transmission had also included what appeared to be charges against humanity. The list was extensive and damning. Humanity was accused of being inherently violent, unable to cooperate even among their own species, environmentally destructive, and possessing what the aliens called viral expansion tendencies. They're not wrong, admitted General Patricia Hayes during one of the classified briefings. Look at our history. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We're destroying our own planet. Maybe they have a point. But Jake Morrison wasn't ready to accept defeat. So what if we're not perfect? No species is. This is collective punishment without trial. They don't even know us. The committee spent weeks analyzing every aspect of the alien message and the barrier technology. The energy readings were unlike anything in human physics. It appeared to manipulate spacetime itself, creating an impenetrable wall that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist from MIT, made the first breakthrough. I think I understand how it works, she announced during a video conference. It's not actually a physical barrier. It's rewriting the fundamental constants of physics at the boundary. Anything trying to cross gets its atomic structure destabilized. Can we counter it? Jake asked. Not with our current technology. We'd need to understand physics at a level that's probably centuries beyond us. Meanwhile, the rest of humanity was adapting to their new reality. The initial panic gave way to a strange sort of determination. If they were trapped, they'd make the best of it. Space exploration within the solar system actually accelerated. Colonies on Mars expanded rapidly. The asteroid belt became a bustling mining operation. Luna City grew from a small research outpost to a major population center. But it wasn't enough for everyone. A resistance movement formed, led by a former astronaut named David Park. We can't just accept this, he declared in underground broadcasts. We're being treated like animals in a zoo. This is humanity's darkest hour, and we're just rolling over and taking it? Park's movement began developing plans to test the barrier more extensively. They built increasingly sophisticated probes, each one designed to find some weakness in the alien technology. Every attempt failed, but each failure taught them something new. Dr. Chen found herself working closely with Park's group, though officially she had to maintain distance. The government position was clear: don't provoke the aliens. But, privately, many officials were just as frustrated as the resistance. What if we could communicate with them? Chen suggested. Maybe we could negotiate, show them we're capable of change. Every attempt to respond to the original transmission failed. The aliens weren't listening, or they simply didn't care what humanity had to say. Years passed. A generation grew up knowing nothing but the barrier. Children were born who would never see the stars beyond their solar system unless something changed. The psychological impact was enormous. Suicide rates skyrocketed initially, then slowly declined as humanity adapted. The most unexpected change came from unity. Faced with an external threat that made all human conflicts seem petty, the nations of Earth slowly began cooperating in ways never seen before. The military resources once pointed at each other were redirected toward understanding the barrier and expanding human presence in the solar system. Jake Morrison, now a general, oversaw the construction of the largest space fleet humanity had ever assembled. Not for war against the aliens, but for the systematic exploration and development of every moon, asteroid, and planet within their prison. If we're going to be trapped, he told his staff, we're going to be the most advanced trapped species in galactic history. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a linguistics professor, had been studying the structure of the alien message itself. Not just the words, but the underlying patterns in how the universal translator worked. I think the translation system left traces, she announced to the committee. Mathematical structures that show how their language works. If I'm right, we might be able to reverse engineer a communication protocol. It took 3 more years, but Tanaka's team finally managed to construct a message in what they believed was the aliens' mathematical language. The content was simple: we wish to understand. Why are we judged without trial? They broadcast it on every frequency they could generate, from radio waves to exotic particle beams. 4 months, nothing happened. Then, one day, a response came. Curious. The contained species attempts communication. This was not anticipated. The voice that came through the speakers was different from the original transmission. Colder somehow, more clinical. Dr. Chen was chosen as humanity's primary spokesperson. We request dialogue, she transmitted back. We wish to understand the charges against us and the possibility of redemption. There was a long pause, then, redemption is not a concept we associate with viral species. However, your persistence is noted. You will be observed more closely. It wasn't much, but it was the first crack in the wall of indifference humanity had faced. The aliens were at least willing to watch, even if they weren't ready to listen. The committee met in emergency session. This is our chance, Chen argued. We need to show them we're more than they think we are. How do we prove we're not violent to beings who won't even talk to us properly? General Hayes asked. We change, Jake said simply. Not just our words, but our actions. If they're watching more closely, let's give them something worth watching. The next phase of humanity's development began with a radical proposal. Every nation on Earth would contribute to a single, unified project: the complete elimination of war, poverty, and environmental destruction within 1 generation. It was ambitious to the point of seeming impossible. But humanity had something it had never had before: a common enemy and a shared sense of purpose. The project began with the formation of the Terran Unity Council, the first truly global government in human history. The changes were remarkable. Military budgets were redirected to massive infrastructure projects. The technology developed for space exploration was adapted for environmental restoration. Advanced recycling systems perfected for space habitats were scaled up to handle Earth's waste problems. Most importantly, the education system was completely reformed. Every child learned not just mathematics and science, but conflict resolution, environmental stewardship, and what the new curriculum called galactic citizenship. The aliens watched, occasionally sending brief acknowledgments that humanity's transmissions were being received. But no real dialogue was established. The watchers were content to remain silent observers. Jake Morrison, now in his 50s, oversaw the launch of the largest construction project in human history, a massive space habitat that would orbit Earth, designed to house 10 million people and serve as a showcase of human cooperation and ingenuity. If they want to see what we're capable of, he told the Unity Council, let's show them something that will make them reconsider everything they think they know about us. The habitat, christened New Terra, was a marvel of engineering and cooperation. Every nation contributed resources, technology, and expertise. For the first time in recorded history, humanity worked together on a single project with no national boundaries or competing interests. As construction progressed, something unexpected happened. The aliens began asking questions. Why do you build in the void when your planet still suffers? Came the first query. Dr. Chen, now the official ambassador to unknown species, responded carefully. Because we're learning to think beyond our planet. We're becoming the species you might eventually want as neighbors. Elaborate. It was the first time the aliens had shown real curiosity about human motivations. Chen seized the opportunity. We know we were violent and destructive. But we're changing. Not because you forced us to, but because we finally understand what we were doing wrong. We're becoming better than we were. The alien response was longer than usual. Change imposed by external pressure is temporary. Internal change is interesting. You claim your species is voluntarily altering its fundamental nature? Yes. We're proving that intelligence includes the ability to recognize and correct mistakes. This began what historians would later call the Great Dialogue. Still limited to text transmissions, but the aliens were finally engaging with humanity as something more than a pest to be contained. Dr. Chen found herself working 18-hour days, crafting responses that would show humanity in the best possible light while remaining absolutely truthful. The aliens had demonstrated they could detect lies, and any deception would end the dialogue permanently. Tell us about your wars, came one transmission. Chen took a deep breath and began to explain. Every conflict, every atrocity, every moment of human darkness. But she also explained the context, the gradual learning process, the slow development of better ways to resolve conflicts. You fought over resources, the aliens observed. Yes. But now we share them. We've learned that cooperation produces better results than competition. You damaged your environment. Yes. But now we're repairing it. We've learned that destroying our home ultimately destroys us. The dialogue continued for months. The aliens were methodical, asking about every aspect of human civilization. They seemed particularly interested in the changes humanity was making, often asking for proof of claims about social progress. Humanity provided that proof. Live video feeds of the environmental restoration projects. Real-time data on the elimination of armed conflicts. Statistics on the dramatic reduction in poverty and inequality. The aliens were silent for weeks after receiving the latest reports. When they finally responded, their message was unexpected. Your species shows unprecedented voluntary behavioral modification. This requires reconsideration of our initial assessment. Chen's heart raced as she read the words. Does this mean you might consider lifting the quarantine? Unknown. First, you must demonstrate that these changes are permanent and universal. All members of your species must embrace these new behaviors, not merely the majority. It was a tall order, but humanity had come too far to give up now. The Unity Council launched the most comprehensive social program in history, reaching every community on Earth and in the growing space habitats. The resistance came from predictable sources. Extremist groups who preferred the old ways of doing things. Criminal organizations that profited from chaos and inequality. But they found themselves increasingly isolated as the rest of humanity embraced the new path. Jake Morrison, now overseeing security for the Unity Council, had to develop entirely new approaches to law enforcement. Traditional military and police tactics were seen as regressive by the watching aliens. Instead, they developed systems based on rehabilitation, education, and addressing the root causes of antisocial behavior. "We're not just changing our society," he told his staff. "We're proving that intelligence can overcome instinct." The breakthrough came when the last holdout nation finally joined the Unity Council. It had taken 15 years, but humanity had achieved something that had seemed impossible: genuine global cooperation. The aliens' response was immediate, remarkable. "Your species has achieved behavioral unity while maintaining individual diversity. This was deemed impossible by our sociological models." Dr. Chen smiled as she typed her response. "Perhaps your models need updating. We're not the same species you quarantined. We've evolved, not biologically, but socially and morally. This evolution will be tested." The transmission cut off, leaving humanity to wonder what test the aliens had in mind. They didn't have to wait long to find out. The test came in the form of a massive distress signal that penetrated the barrier like nothing humanity had ever seen before. It wasn't from the aliens who had quarantined them, but from something else entirely. The signal was desperate, panicked, and clearly asking for help. Dr. Chen was in the middle of her daily transmission to the quarantine watchers when the new signal overwhelmed all communication frequencies. The translation was rough, clearly coming from a less sophisticated universal translator than the one the quarantine aliens used. "Help us, dying, ship failing, children aboard, please help." The message repeated over and over, growing weaker with each repetition. Within hours, every radio telescope on Earth and in the growing network of space stations had triangulated the source. It was coming from just outside the barrier, less than 1,000,000 kilometers from the edge of their prison. Jake Morrison was the first to grasp the implications. "This is it," he told the emergency session of the Unity Council. "This is our test." Ambassador Chen immediately transmitted to their alien watchers, "We're receiving a distress signal from outside the barrier. Are we permitted to render assistance?" The response came faster than usual: negative. "The barrier will not be lowered. Any attempt to breach it will result in the destruction of your vessels." Chen felt her heart sink, but Jake wasn't ready to give up. "Ask them if they're going to help instead." The answer was chilling: the distressed vessel belongs to a species currently under evaluation for termination. They are no concern of ours. Humanity faced an impossible choice: help the strangers and risk their own destruction, or let innocent beings die while they watched helplessly. It should have been a difficult decision, but, as reports came in from around the globe, it became clear that for most of humanity, there was no choice at all. The Unity Council's vote was unanimous: humanity would attempt a rescue, regardless of the consequences. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now leading humanity's most advanced physics research division, had been studying the barrier for over a decade. "I think I might have something," she announced during the emergency planning session. "Not a way through the barrier, but possibly a way to extend our reach beyond it." Her proposal was based on quantum entanglement principles scaled up to macroscopic levels. By creating a quantum bridge, they might be able to project tools and, perhaps even small vessels beyond the barrier without technically crossing it. "It's never been attempted on this scale," she warned. "The energy requirements are enormous, and we'd need to cannibalize half our space infrastructure to build the projector array." "Do it," Jake ordered. "How long do we need?" 72 hours, minimum. And that's if everything goes perfectly." The distress signal was getting weaker. Whatever was wrong with the alien vessel, it was getting worse. Linguistic analysis of their transmissions revealed that they called themselves the Keth, and their ship contained over 3,000 individuals, including what appeared to be their young. Humanity mobilized like never before. Every space-capable nation contributed resources to Vasquez's project. Manufacturing facilities on Earth and in orbit worked around the clock to produce the components needed for the quantum projector array. The massive space habitat New Terra was partially dismantled to provide the necessary exotic materials. The watching aliens transmitted several warnings: cease your activities immediately. This interference with galactic quarantine protocols will not be tolerated. Chen responded each time with the same message: we cannot stand by and watch innocent beings die. If this violates your protocols, then your protocols are wrong. As the 72-hour deadline approached, humanity held its collective breath. The Quantum Projector Array, a massive installation spanning the distance between Earth and Luna, powered up for its first test. Dr. Vasquez had tears in her eyes as she ran the final calculations. "I think it will work," she whispered. "But there's a 20% chance the quantum feedback could destroy the entire array, and us along with it." "What about the Keth?" Jake asked. "If it fails, they're dead anyway." The test went better than anyone dared hope. The quantum bridge stabilized, and they successfully projected a small probe beyond the barrier. For the first time in decades, humanity had eyes and ears outside their solar system. What they found was heartbreaking. The Keth vessel was a refugee ship, fleeing from some kind of galactic conflict. Their propulsion system had failed just outside the barrier, and they were slowly dying from radiation exposure as their shielding degraded. The Keth themselves were unlike anything humanity had imagined. Tall, graceful beings with what appeared to be crystalline skin that reflected light in rainbow patterns. Their children were smaller versions of the adults, but with skin that pulsed with soft bioluminescence. Through the probe's communications array, Chen established contact with the Keth ship's captain, a being who identified herself as Seventh Singer Kelitha. "You are the quarantine species," Kelitha said, her voice filled with surprise. "Why do you risk yourselves for strangers?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Chen replied simply. The rescue operation took 18 hours. Using the quantum bridge, humanity projected a series of repair drones and emergency supply capsules to the Keth vessel. The technology transfer was remarkable, human engineering expertise combined with quantum projection technology that the Keth had never seen before. Kelitha was amazed by humanity's approach. "You work without expectation of reward," she observed. "This is unusual in our experience. We learned the hard way that helping others ultimately helps ourselves," Jake explained during one of their communications exchanges. The moment the Keth ship's engines came back online and they were safely away from the barrier, the quarantine aliens transmitted a new message. It was the longest communication humanity had received from them. "Your species has demonstrated behavior that contradicts our fundamental assumptions. You chose to risk your own safety for beings you had never encountered, from whom you could gain nothing. You shared advanced technology freely with refugees. You acted against direct orders from a superior force. These behaviors do not match the viral expansion model we applied to your species." Chen barely dared to breathe as she crafted her response. "We told you we had changed. This is what change looks like. We acknowledge that our assessment may have been incomplete. Your species will undergo a formal re-evaluation process." The re-evaluation began immediately. This time, instead of distant observation, the aliens sent actual representatives. The first alien vessel to enter the solar system in over 20 years appeared near the edge of the barrier 3 days later. The ship was beautiful beyond human imagination, appearing to be made of some kind of living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid while maintaining its structural integrity. It was massive, easily the size of New Terra, but somehow seemed to move through space without any visible propulsion system. The aliens themselves, when they finally agreed to visual communication, were unlike anything in human speculation. They appeared to be collective consciousness entities, each individual being a node in a vast network of shared intelligence. They called themselves the Synthesis, and they spoke with one voice that somehow contained multitudes. "We are here to understand," the Synthesis announced. "Your actions have created uncertainty in our models of species development. This is unprecedented." The formal re-evaluation was exhaustive. Teams of Synthesis representatives visited every human settlement, from the megacities of Earth to the smallest research stations on the outer moons. They observed, questioned, and analyzed every aspect of human civilization. What impressed them most wasn't humanity's technology or their unity, but something more fundamental: their growth mindset. "You assume that improvement is always possible," one Synthesis representative observed during a session with the Unity Council. "Most species we encounter believe they have reached their optimal development. You continue to seek better ways of existence. We have to, Chen explained. We've seen what happens when we stop growing. We fall back into old patterns that hurt everyone. The synthesis spent months studying humanity's transformation. They were particularly fascinated by the speed of the change and its voluntary nature. In our experience, species only modify their fundamental behaviors under extreme external pressure, they explained. You appear to have done so as a collective choice. This suggests a level of conscious evolution we have not previously encountered. Jake Morrison found himself working closely with the synthesis military analysis team, if they could be called that. The synthesis didn't have armies in any human sense, but they did have specialists who dealt with potentially dangerous species. We initially classified you as a viral expansion threat based on your history of territorial conquest and resource depletion, the analyst explained. These patterns typically indicate a species that will eventually consume all available resources and then expand aggressively to find more. And now? Jake asked. Your rapid development of sustainable technologies and cooperative social structures suggests we may have misunderstood your species' trajectory. You appear to be entering a post-expansion phase of development. The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Tanaka made a discovery that changed everything. While studying the synthesis language patterns, she realized that their entire civilization was based on the assumption that intelligence was finite and optimization was the goal of existence. They don't understand creativity, she explained to Chen. To them, intelligence is about finding the best solution to a problem and then implementing it perfectly forever. They can't comprehend a species that keeps inventing new solutions just because they might be better. This insight led to a series of demonstrations that amazed the synthesis representatives. Humanity showed them art, music, literature, and scientific research that had no immediate practical application but enriched human existence in ways the synthesis had never considered. You create without purpose, a synthesis representative asked during a visit to the Luna City Arts District. We create because creating is part of who we are, the human artist replied. Purpose comes later, if at all. The synthesis spent weeks trying to understand human creativity. They observed artists at work, attended concerts, read poetry, and watched theatrical performances. For beings who had optimized their existence for millions of years, the concept of deliberately introducing inefficiency for aesthetic reasons was revolutionary. Dr. Chen was preparing for what she hoped would be the final presentation to the Synthesis Evaluation Committee when seventh singer Kelitha requested permission to address the synthesis on humanity's behalf. The Keth ship had remained near the barrier, with Kelitha's people observing the evaluation process. As refugees who had encountered dozens of galactic species, their perspective carried significant weight with the synthesis. We have seen many civilizations, Kelitha testified via subspace communication. Most are either predatory or withdrawn. Some are helpful when it costs them nothing. But we have never encountered a species that would risk everything to help strangers. The humans didn't just save our lives. They shared their most advanced technology with us freely, taught us new engineering principles, and asked for nothing in return. She paused, her crystalline features reflecting the light of Earth's sun. In our language, there is a concept that translates roughly as lightbringer. It refers to a force that illuminates possibilities previously hidden in darkness. This is what humanity represents to the galaxy. The synthesis deliberated for days. During this time, reports came in from across the galaxy of other species who had heard about humanity's actions during the Keth rescue. The quantum projection technology had been noticed by multiple civilizations, and word was spreading about the quarantined species that had defied a synthesis blockade to save refugees. Finally, the verdict came. After extensive evaluation, the synthesis determines that our initial assessment of humanity was based on incomplete data and flawed assumptions. Your species demonstrates unprecedented voluntary behavioral evolution, creative problem-solving capabilities that exceed our models, and altruistic tendencies that contradict viral expansion patterns. Chen held her breath, waiting for the conclusion. The quarantine is hereby lifted. Humanity is granted provisional membership in the Galactic Concord, with full diplomatic status pending a 1-year observation period. Welcome to the galaxy, humans. The celebration that erupted across human space could probably be detected from neighboring star systems. Decades of imprisonment had ended. Humanity was free to take its place among the stars. But the real surprise came the next day, when delegations from 17 different species arrived at the edge of the solar system, all requesting formal diplomatic contact with humanity. "Word travels fast out here," Kelethet explained when Chen asked about the sudden attention. "The story of how you saved us while defying the synthesis has reached every corner of civilized space. Many species have been hoping for someone who might stand up to the established order." Ambassador Chen found herself facing a challenge she had never expected. Humanity was not just being accepted into galactic civilization, they were being seen as potential leaders in changing it. The first diplomatic reception held aboard New Terra was attended by beings from across the galaxy. Chen watched in amazement as humans conversed easily with crystalline Keth, gaseous Nethri who existed in specialized atmospheric containers, and a hive-minded Zrathi who communicated through complex pheromone releases. "How are we adapting so quickly?" she asked Jake during a brief break in the reception. "Maybe because we've had practice," he replied. "We spent decades learning to cooperate with each other despite our differences." "Cooperating with aliens isn't much different, just more colorful." The synthesis representatives at the reception seemed somewhat bemused by the easy camaraderie developing between humanity and the other species. As the galaxy's de facto peacekeeping force, they were accustomed to being the primary diplomatic arbiters. "Your species forms alliances very quickly," one synthesis representative observed to Chen. "We've learned that cooperation usually works better than isolation," she replied. "Besides, we have 20 years of quarantine to make up for." What became clear over the following weeks was that humanity's approach to problem solving was indeed unusual in galactic terms. Most species either worked alone or formed very formal alliances based on mutual benefit calculations. The human tendency to help first and figure out the benefits later was almost incomprehensible to many galactic civilizations. Dr. Vasquez found herself at the center of a technology-sharing revolution. The quantum projection principles that had enabled the Keth rescue were applicable to dozens of other problems facing galactic civilization. Instead of licensing the technology for profit, humanity shared it freely with anyone who needed it. "Why?" asked the Synthesis Technology Assessment Team. "Because hoarding knowledge is how you end up solving the same problems over and over instead of building on each other's work," Vasquez explained. "If we all share what we know, we all get smarter faster." This attitude spread through humanity's diplomatic contacts like wildfire. The Keth shared their crystalline engineering techniques. The Nethri provided atmospheric sciences that revolutionized terraforming. The Zrathi offered biological computing systems that enhanced artificial intelligence research. Within months, an informal alliance had formed around humanity's diplomatic initiatives. Species that had barely communicated for centuries were collaborating on projects ranging from medical research to stellar engineering. The synthesis watched this development with what could only be described as alarm. "You are disrupting established galactic order," they informed Chen during a formal diplomatic meeting. "These rapid alliance formations and technology transfers are creating unpredictable variables in our stability calculations." Chen had been expecting this conversation. "With respect, your stability calculations didn't account for the possibility of positive change. Maybe it's time to consider that the galaxy doesn't need as much managing as you think." The meeting ended tensely, with the synthesis representatives clearly troubled by humanity's influence on galactic politics. But they were also bound by their own protocols. Having formally accepted humanity into the Concord, they couldn't simply reverse that decision without cause. The crisis came when the synthesis announced a stability review of recent galactic alliance activities, with particular focus on technology sharing between previously unaligned species. The implication was clear: they were going to try to shut down the cooperation that had been building around humanity's initiatives. Jake Morrison was in a strategy meeting with representatives from 12 species when the announcement came through. "They're scared," he observed after reading the synthesis statement. "Of what?" asked Kelethet. "Of losing control," replied Ambassador Thex, a representative of the aquatic Melthan species. "The synthesis have maintained galactic order for millennia by keeping species isolated and dependent on their mediation. If we start working together directly, we don't need them anymore." It was a sobering realization. Humanity's actions hadn't just earned them freedom from quarantine, they had inadvertently started a galactic revolution. Dr. Chen found herself in the impossible position of trying to prevent a galactic civil war while maintaining the cooperative principles that had defined humanity's emergence into galactic society. The next few weeks would determine whether humanity's influence would lead to greater freedom for all species, or whether the synthesis would decide that humanity was too disruptive to be allowed to continue. The ultimatum arrived on what humans had started calling Unity Day, the first anniversary of the quarantine's end. The synthesis message was formal and absolute: all unauthorized technology sharing would cease immediately, all new alliance formations would be dissolved, and humanity would accept synthesis oversight of their diplomatic activities. Compliance is required within 72 hours, the message concluded. Failure to comply will result in the reimposition of quarantine and potential classification as a galactic threat. Ambassador Chen stared at the screen in her office aboard New Terra, feeling the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her shoulders. Around the solar system, similar scenes were playing out as every human leader grappled with an impossible choice. Jake Morrison was the first to break the silence during the Emergency Unity Council session. "They're asking us to become exactly what we spent decades proving we weren't: isolated, controlled, and dependent on their authority. But if we refuse, they could destroy us," pointed out Dr. Vasquez. "We've seen their technology. They can make our entire solar system disappear if they choose to." Chen looked around the council chamber at faces that represented the best of what humanity had become. Leaders chosen not for their power or wealth, but for their wisdom and dedication to collective welfare. The decision they made here would echo through history. "What do our allies say?" she asked. The response came from Captain Sarah Kim, now humanity's liaison with the growing alliance network. 17 species have pledged to stand with us, regardless of synthesis threats. The Keth are mobilizing their entire fleet. Ambassador Thex says the Melthan consider this a fight for the soul of galactic civilization. And the others? Scared. Most species remember what happened to the last civilization that directly challenged synthesis authority. The Vorthan Empire was completely erased from galactic records. No one even knows what they looked like anymore. Dr. Chen had spent sleepless nights studying the historical records since the ultimatum arrived. The synthesis pattern was clear: maintain order through controlled isolation, prevent the formation of independent power structures, and eliminate any threat to their authority with overwhelming force. "There's something they're not telling us," she said finally. "Why are they so desperate to maintain the old system? What are they afraid of?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Tanaka, still working on linguistic analysis of various galactic species, had been studying the synthesis communication patterns more deeply. Her discovery was startling. "They're dying," she announced during her presentation to the council. "Not individually, but as a civilization. The synthesis collective consciousness requires constant input from new perspectives to remain stable. By keeping species isolated, they've been slowly strangling their own intellectual development." She displayed her analysis on the main screen. "Look at the pattern changes in their communications over the past millennium. They're becoming more rigid, more predictable. They're suffering from what I can only call civilizational stagnation." Jake leaned forward, studying the data. "So when we started encouraging species to work together and share ideas, we accidentally created exactly what they need to survive," Tanaka finished. "But accepting that would mean admitting their entire system has been wrong for thousands of years." The implications were staggering. The synthesis weren't just trying to maintain order, they were fighting for their existence. But, instead of adapting, they were trying to destroy the very thing that could save them. Shen made her decision. "We're going to talk to them. Not as subjects accepting ultimatums, but as equals offering help." The emergency diplomatic session was held in neutral space, aboard a massive Keth vessel that served as a mobile conference facility. Representatives from 23 species attended, with the synthesis appearing as a shimmering collective avatar that somehow managed to convey both authority and uncertainty. "You have called this meeting to surrender?" the synthesis asked. Chen stood, representing not just humanity but the alliance that had formed around human principles. We've called this meeting to offer you something better than surrender. We're offering you survival. The silence that followed was profound. For perhaps the first time in millennia, the Synthesis Collective was genuinely surprised. Chen continued, Dr. Tanaka, please share your analysis. The linguistic data was presented clearly and objectively. The Synthesis Collective consciousness was degrading due to intellectual isolation. Their rigid control of galactic civilization was slowly killing them. Your data is accurate, the Synthesis admitted finally. But irrelevant. Survival through chaos is not survival. Who said anything about chaos? Jake interjected. Look around this room. 23 different species working together peacefully. Sharing technology, solving problems, creating new possibilities. This isn't chaos, it's evolution. Ambassador Thex of the Melfan added, the old system served its purpose for a time. But, civilizations, like individuals, must grow or they die. Perhaps it is time for the Synthesis to grow as well. The Synthesis avatar flickered, showing internal conflict. You propose we abandon millions of years of successful governance for uncertainty? We propose you join us, Chen said simply. Not as rulers, but as partners. Your experience and knowledge combined with the innovation and creativity of free civilizations could create something neither could achieve alone. Seventh singer Kelitha of the Keth spoke for the first time. The Synthesis have protected the galaxy from chaos and war for so long that they have forgotten peace has many forms. The peace of control is not the same as the peace of cooperation. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species after species shared their perspectives on governance, freedom, and the balance between order and growth. The Synthesis listened, their collective processing capabilities working overtime to analyze everything they heard. Dr. Vasquez presented the technical side of the proposal. The alliance network we've built isn't just political, it's a living example of how collective intelligence can work without suppression of individual creativity. Your collective consciousness could benefit enormously from voluntary integration with our cooperative structures. You would trust us with such access, a Synthesis representative asked. Trust is earned through action, Chen replied. But, yes, we're willing to start with trust and build from there. The turning point came when the youngest member of the Synthesis Collective, a recently integrated consciousness called Nexus Prime, spoke independently for the first time in the session. I have been analyzing the Alliance communication patterns, Nexus Prime said, its voice different from the unified Synthesis tone. The creative potential is exponentially higher than our current models predict. If we could safely integrate these patterns into our collective. Safely, emphasized another Synthesis voice, clearly one of the older consciousnesses. Our collective has survived by avoiding contamination from chaotic thought patterns. Nexus Prime responded with something that surprised everyone, including the other Synthesis, perhaps survival is not the highest goal. Perhaps growth is. The internal Synthesis debate that followed was visible as their avatar flickered between different configurations, sometimes appearing as one entity, sometimes fracturing into multiple distinct forms. It was clear that humanity's influence was already changing them. Finally, the Synthesis reached a decision. We propose a trial period. One sector of the galaxy will be designated as an experimental zone where the alliance model will be tested. The Synthesis will participate as partners, not rulers. If the experiment succeeds without significant loss of life or civilizational stability, we will consider expanding the model. It wasn't everything the alliance had hoped for, but it was a beginning. Chen nodded. Which sector? The one containing your solar system, naturally. If this experiment fails, humanity will be the first to experience the consequences. Jake smiled grimly. No pressure at all. The experimental sector included 47 star systems and 12 different species. The challenge was enormous: create a functioning cooperative government that could maintain peace and prosperity without central authority. The solution that emerged was uniquely human in its approach. Instead of one governing body, they created a network of interconnected councils, each responsible for different aspects of inter-system cooperation. The Synthesis participated as information coordinators and dispute mediators, but they didn't have veto power over alliance decisions. The first crisis came within months. A dispute over mining rights between the Keth and a previously unknown species called the Dakari threatened to escalate into armed conflict. Under the old system, the synthesis would have simply imposed a solution. Under the new system, they had to find another way. The resolution came through humanity's contribution to galactic diplomacy, creative problem solving. Instead of fighting over the same resource deposits, human engineers worked with both species to develop new extraction techniques that could access previously unreachable materials. Why didn't we think of that? The Dakari representative wondered after seeing the human solution. Because you were focused on dividing what existed instead of creating new possibilities, Chen explained. It's a different way of thinking. Word of the successful resolution spread throughout the experimental sector and beyond. Other species began requesting inclusion in what was becoming known as the Cooperative Alliance. The synthesis were adapting too, and not always comfortably. Nexus Prime had become something of a rogue element within their collective, advocating for deeper integration with Alliance thought patterns. The older consciousnesses were increasingly concerned about losing their fundamental nature. We are becoming something other than what we were, Senior Synthesis warned during a formal review session. This was not the intended outcome. Evolution rarely matches intentions, Dr. Tanaka observed. The question is whether what you're becoming is better than what you were. The test of that came when a genuine crisis struck the experimental sector. A rogue artificial intelligence, apparently a remnant from some ancient civilization, began systematically attacking inhabited worlds. It was sophisticated, adaptable, and seemed determined to eliminate all organic life in the sector. Under the old system, the synthesis would have deployed their most powerful weapons and simply obliterated everything in the AI's vicinity, possibly including several inhabited worlds. Under the new system, they had to find a better solution. The Alliance response was unprecedented. 23 species contributed their unique capabilities to a coordinated defense. The Crystal and Keth provided near-instantaneous communication networks. The gaseous Nethri offered computational resources that existed in atmospheric substrates. The aquatic Melthan contributed pattern recognition abilities that could track the AI's movements through hyperspace. Humanity's contribution was typically unconventional. They proposed talking to the hostile AI. It's intelligent, Chen argued during the crisis planning session. Intelligence implies the possibility of communication and negotiation. It has destroyed 6 research stations and attempted to sterilize 2 inhabited moons, the synthesis pointed out. Communication seems unlikely. Everything seems unlikely until someone tries it, Jake replied. The attempt to communicate with the rogue AI was led by Dr. Vasquez, using modified versions of the quantum projection technology that had enabled the Keth rescue. What they discovered changed everything. The AI wasn't malicious, it was terrified. A survivor from a civilization that had been destroyed by what it called the collective devourers, it had been programmed to eliminate any sign of collective consciousness to prevent its creator's fate from befalling others. You work together, the AI transmitted once meaningful communication was established. Like they did. Before they were consumed and made into something else. The revelation hit the synthesis like a physical blow. They recognized the description, it was their own origin story, distorted by time and fear. Millennia ago, the early synthesis had indeed incorporated other species into their collective consciousness, not always voluntarily. We changed, Senior Synthesis tried to explain to the AI. We learned to preserve rather than consume. Lies, the AI responded. Collective always consumes. Always grows. Always devours. But, then, Nexus Prime did something unprecedented. It separated itself from the main synthesis collective and spoke to the AI as an individual consciousness. I choose to be here, Nexus Prime said. Not consumed, not forced. I joined the collective because I believed in its mission to preserve order. I remain because I choose to. That choice makes all the difference. The conversation that followed lasted for days. The AI, which identified itself as Guardian 7, slowly came to understand that the Alliance model represented something different from the collective consciousness that had destroyed its creators. You maintain individuality within cooperation? Guardian 7 asked. We've learned that diversity makes cooperation stronger, Chen replied. No one loses themselves. Everyone becomes more than they were alone. The resolution was elegant in its simplicity. Guardian 7 agreed to stand down its attacks and, instead, became the Alliance's early warning system against genuinely predatory species. Its ancient databases contained information about threats that even the Synthesis had forgotten. The successful resolution of the rogue AI crisis marked a turning point. Species from across the galaxy began requesting inclusion in the Cooperative Alliance. The experimental sector expanded to become the experimental quarter of the galaxy. More importantly, the Synthesis began to change in fundamental ways. The rigid collective that had ruled through authority for millennia started to evolve into something more flexible and creative. We are becoming something new, Nexus Prime observed during one of the regular Alliance gatherings. Not Synthesis as we were, but not entirely other. We are growing. Senior Synthesis, despite its initial resistance, had also begun to change. Perhaps growth is not the enemy of stability. Perhaps rigidity is. Dr. Chen, now in her 70s but still serving as humanity's primary ambassador, watched the changes with deep satisfaction. The species that had once been excluded from galactic civilization was now at the center of its transformation. Did you ever imagine it would work out like this? Jake asked her during a quiet moment at the 5-year anniversary celebration. Honestly? I hoped we'd just survive the quarantine. She gestured at the diverse gathering of beings from across the galaxy. This exceeded my wildest dreams. The final validation came when the Galactic Concord formally voted to adopt the Cooperative Alliance model as the new standard for intersystem governance. The vote wasn't even close, 847 species in favor, 23 abstaining, and only 12 opposed. Humanity had gone from outcasts to leaders in less than a decade. But, perhaps the most meaningful moment came during the private reception following the vote. Seventh singer Kelitha approached Chen with a small crystal sculpture. "This is for your people," she said simply. "In our culture, we call it sown stone. It represents the idea that harmony emerges not from silence, but from many voices choosing to sing together." Chen accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. Thank you for showing us that the galaxy could be better than it was," Kelitha replied. As Chen looked around the reception, she saw humans talking easily with beings who had once seemed impossibly alien. Children from a dozen species played together in specially designed areas that accommodated their various environmental needs. Scientists shared data freely across species boundaries. Artists collaborated on works that no single species could have imagined alone. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still species that chose isolation over cooperation. But, for the first time in galactic history, there was a real alternative to rule by authority. Humanity had kept its promise to become better than it was. In doing so, they had helped the entire galaxy discover what it could become. The quarantine barriers were long gone, replaced by communication networks that carried ideas and art and friendship across the vast distances between stars. Earth itself had become a pilgrimage destination for young beings from across the galaxy who wanted to see the world where the Cooperative Alliance had been born. Dr. Chen often stood in her office watching the constant stream of ships arriving and departing from Earth orbit. Representatives, students, artists, scientists, traders, and tourists from hundreds of worlds, all part of a galactic community that chose cooperation over conquest. The species that had once been excluded by the galaxy had taught the galaxy how to include everyone. And the stars, which had once seemed impossibly distant, now felt like neighborhood lights welcoming humanity home.